Here we have a Ford Falcon dropping onto a soft beach. No, it's not four-wheel drive, it is just two-wheel drive, and you're on board an all-wheel drive Subaru Forester. We are on our way to the very remote Bilbunya dunes and the Baxter cliffs. This is Underdog Offroad, and we hope to share our adventure along with some tips and tricks on off-roading, even when your budget vehicle isn't the most capable in the world. Actually, we found a dead end, and we're now doubling back. So we're getting further away from the cliffs, but you get the idea. The route that we are taking follows the old telegraph line, which once connected Western Australia to the rest of the world. The further we get from civilization, the more telegraph poles are still intact. For obvious reasons, the track zigzags in between the poles as much as possible. Once you head down the very few tracks that head to the beach, you'll begin to get your very first glimpses of those famous cliffs. There are plenty of soft patches along the way, so you want to make sure you know what you're doing. Our first Underdog top tip is to always keep your wheels straight when starting and stopping. This somewhat applies to four-wheel drives, and it definitely applies to rear-wheel drives where your front wheels aren't giving you any power. Any steering angle just acts like an anchor. Don't be afraid to make a 100-point U-turn if you have to. Just minimise that steering angle and stop driving before your wheels dig too deep a hole. Fast forward to another trip where some rookie known as ourselves learns this. I mean, demonstrates the steering anchor effect.
Go forward. That's right. Yep. And put the diff lock on. Yeah, that'll probably do you. Woohoo!
That is some good learning right there. Back on track. Well, sort of back on track. As long as you back off as soon as you stop moving, before digging a deep hole, it usually isn't a bad recovery. After all, you don't have to make every obstacle the first attempt. And here, we can see the low centre of gravity really coming in handy. Hey, my forest has made it into this video. Wicked! The inland track eventually became unpassable for anybody who doesn't like panel damage. So the next day, we timed the tides and ran the beach gauntlet. As you can see, during the high tide there will be no beach left at all, so you really don't want to get caught out by the tides here. This final run to the cliffs isn't too far to travel, so it's not too bad. But the route from Israelite Bay up until this point has some really long beach runs in between exit points, so you want to be careful. If you do find somewhere impassable, it's going to be a long double back using a lot of fuel. Of course, we have the essential cliff photos at this magnificent location. The sand at the base of the cliffs has some purple streaks, which just become a deeper purple once you dig down. We're not really sure what minerals are running down the cliffs to create this. Anyway, it was time to head back before the tides come in. We didn't actually have reception here, so there's a bit of guesswork involved in the tides. We do advise checking the tides before you leave. The way out was just as fun. Our next stop was Bilbunya sand dunes. These dunes are massive. However, they had many random soft patches that could easily catch you out, so we decided to minimise driving through them. We did, however, walk to the peak of what we think was the highest one. Needless to say, it was very windy up there. After experiencing the dunes, our next stop was to the top of the cliffs. This track is quite steep, but the rubber mats give you all the traction you could possibly need. Just pick a low gear and crawl on up. You will still want to keep your tyre pressures fairly low, just for the sandy patch at the end.
Oh boy, that was a challenge.
Once at the top of the cliffs, there's still a fair distance to travel before you get those spectacular views. This track is a real mix of rock and sand, so you're going to end up at some compromised tyre pressure. If you're in a low vehicle like we are, you really need to focus on keeping your wheels on the high points over the rocky sections just to avoid scraping. Time spent walking the track first is usually less than the time spent fixing damage or recovering. The tracks at the cliff edge carry on for a fair way, but we did not think we had the fuel for this at the moment, so that just means that we've got more to explore next time. The day that we spent exploring this area simply wasn't long enough, but it really was time to go. There's plenty more to see. It's always sad leaving a spectacular location. The track in and out was a mix of sand and rock, so 16 psi ended up being the tyre pressure of choice in high light vehicles. If your vehicle's a bit heavier, you'd probably run a bit higher. On the way out, we soon realised that we just weren't cutting it fine enough in fuel, so we took a detour through Point Malcolm on the way out. This is where we decided it would be a good place to introduce ourselves. Enjoy. Hello folks, here we are at Point Malcolm Campground. We've done pretty well, we've got the place to ourselves. Imagine this place would get pretty popular based on the number of campsites around, so we managed to snag the best one. Here's our campground, got boat, Forester, Chris, Falcon. English breakfast is nearly ready. It's more an Australian dinner, but you get that.
Yeah, but time zone backwards, so.
It's how we do things. Everything's upside down here.
That's right. Including breakfast and dinner.
And we've got ocean glimpses. What more could you ask for?
You got to do the zoomy thing, in and out really fast, like they do on TikTok.
Like that?
Yeah, that.
Yeah, that should please the viewers. Enough of that. Time to get some fuel in Conding Up. The full loop from Conding Up to Israelite Bay to Bilbunya Dunes and then back detouring through Point Malcolm and filling up in Conding Up again with your usual small amounts of random messing around came in at 651 kilometres on the Forester, which just scraped through using 2 jerry cans, averaging 12.6 litres per 100k. The Falcon didn't do as great on the fuel, but still not bad, and scraped through with 3 jerry cans. Once fueled up and Conding Up, we decided to visit some of those more touristy spots like Duke of Orleans and Warton Beach. But after days of isolation, we really just found the crowds distressing, wishing we were somewhere a bit more peaceful. We realised we really had to go back to remote Cape Arid, where we belong, even if it meant arriving at camp in the dark. This day towards the end of our trip ended up being the least windy day of our 2-week adventure. As well as our third yachting day, it was actually just the first day dry enough to get the camera out.
Hang in there, Patchy.
I didn't realise this at this point, but Chris actually thought that there was a proper inflatable repair patch underneath that duct tape. It wasn't until we were further out that I told him that I'd left it at home. But the patch had held since the repair on day one, and was only just starting to fall off a little bit towards the end of this voyage. When the conditions are a bit too rough for the size of your vessel, your main goal is to keep the nose of the boat up high. This massively reduces how wet you get. That being said, always wear waterproof clothes when you're on board my yacht. One day that we got the camera out was also our worst fishing day, of course. On this lovely, slightly rough day, we've discovered that there is grass on this island. The engine is just conked out. Things are going well.
Yes.
Chris is winding in what's probably not a fish.
Yeah, probably not.
I'll cut it here so we don't find out. After a short row back, actually it was a very long row back. After a long row back to shore, it was good to be dry and on land again. But at least we made it out before this guy came along. Anyway, it was time to head on out. Hope you enjoyed our adventure.